let's get into the games themselves. Now, we finally have 4 first-round games. Let's break them down, okay?
Yep.
Let's start with Clemson traveling to Austin. They will take on Texas. That game is at 4 p.m. on Saturday, December 21st. Okay, first of all, heavy hitters. A lot of orange, different shades of orange. But this is a really interesting matchup because we wondered, if Texas would get hurt more by losing the SEC championship game. They don't, right? They still get the great spot as a number 5 seed, and they draw Clemson, a team that would not have made the field if they didn't win the ACC championship game. Joshua, I want to start with the quarterbacks in this game because it feels like they are going to be a story, big narrative game for the quarterbacks.
I would agree with that. I mean, Cade Klubnik, after Clemson's opening game with Georgia, I think we kind of wrote them off a little bit. And Cade Klubnik's been playing really good football throughout the season. Very productive offense for Clemson. They move the ball up and down the field. That's not their issue this year. But then you look at Quinn Ewers, who was like, could he be quarterback 1 in college football? Could he win the Heisman this year? And I think he's been just good. But in some of the big moments, he's kind of fallen flat. The first game against Georgia, he was spooked for a lot of the game. He was getting hit like he just didn't look like himself. And then even in this last one, he hit some big shots down the field. I think he tries to place the ball a little bit too much, and so you get some issues with how it's delivered out to the edges, and then ultimately a couple of turnovers there. I think eyes are going to be on the quarterbacks to start. But where I would shift after that is either one of these defenses is going to have a big save. Clemson plays defense the way they have this year. I think Texas is going to be able to move the ball. In Texas, going up against a high-powered Clemson offense, their defense is going to have to play their best game, which they've been really good all year long.
Yeah, and to go back on the Quinn Ewers point, right, like I think we have a lot of questions about his play in the biggest games against Georgia, right? Like the way that he played in those 2 games. What's different with the Clemson defense, with their weaknesses, with their strengths? And then do we see Arch Manning?
Right.
I mean, I think you have to think yes, certainly in different packages in the way that they use him. But I think that could be a wrinkle that ends up being significant in this game for a Clemson team that can be up and down. And when they've lost games, they've gotten beat pretty badly. So I think you run into that risk as well if you're Clemson going into this atmosphere for the very first time, an on-campus playoff game. You gotta keep pace early.
I mean, this is a Clemson team in some of their losses that have given up 30 points, right? Like they've done that in wins this year. It's certainly a defense that has had its issues. But one thing that stood out to me, though, against SMU, that secondary for Clemson had those guys in a blender. Yeah. And I like the SMU skill players there. So, there's also this question for me of, is Dabo still a guy in a big game who can get it done? Like, do we trust that in this scenario, right? Conference championship.
I was going to say, did we feel that? Did we learn that this past weekend
in
Charlotte?
I mean, yes and no, right? Jump out on a really good SMU team.
And then almost blew it.
And then almost blew it. But then had yourself set up, right? Like you get the big return when you need it. Then your field goal kicker goes out there.
56-yard
young guy, right? But he didn't feel any of the pressure of the moment. Went out there, swung his foot, ball goes through. Like, is he still a big game coach? And then for Sark, we watched you make it to the playoffs last year. And then what happened? Right? Like, can you become the guy who's the big game coach now? I'm very curious about all this.
Yeah, I talked to a bunch of Texas players throughout the year of, what they learned. And, I do think you learn something by getting there.
Oh, yeah.
And certainly, that was a great game against Washington that they came up just short. But what do you take from that you can use now? With a Clemson team that hasn't been in the playoff, by the way, the last few years. They don't have guys on that roster who've been there every single year like they used to. That one's going to be really fascinating. Plus the idea that Clemson's kind of playing with house money a little bit. Like the way that they celebrated that ACC championship game, the way Dabo Swinney's been talking about this team.
I'm telling you.
They're pretty fearless, and they're not going to be predicted to win this game. They're going to be underdogs against Texas. And then the questions that we have about Texas are just kind of always going to be there, right? They've been thin at the running back position all season. We have seen their offensive line get pushed around against Georgia at times this season. How do they handle those moments? I think it's going to be really interesting. But that one's going to be fascinating, I think, just based on the storylines coming in and, like you said, kind of the legacy-making moments for the quarterbacks.
Yeah, it's going to your legacy's great. It's going to be a legacy game. I think more so for Quinn Ewers and for Cade Klubnik. But also, the coaching storyline, too, about, is Dabo's run truly over? Right? Is this the true end of the dynasty? You make it into the playoff, lose in the first round. Can we kind of push it to the side? And then is Sark going to be the next guy up?
Or did Dabo already push back on that narrative? We were ready to write him off and end the legacy and the dynasty in week 1 when they go and lose to Georgia. they had their ups, they had their downs, they fought through, they won the game that they needed to get.
I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at. It's like
no, that's what's at stake,
yeah,
right? Like, are you still in the uppermost echelon of college football, Clemson?
Lose to your rival, go to the ACC champ, win the game. It's a weird year, and yes, I do think we have to ask the question: is the window still open for them?